I discovered the plot to steal my life while watching a delayed feed of my own living room. The cruelty in my son's eyes confirmed the deepest dread of a mother. I am Eleanor. At 68 years old, I believed my life was entering its golden, well-deserved twilight. My days as a registered nurse, spent battling shift fatigue and human frailty, were over. My reward? This spacious, charming house in the historic district, debt-free, purchased with 3 decades of tireless sacrifice. And of course, the company of my only child, David, and his wife, Veronica. They moved in 3 years ago, citing concern for my health and a desire to help me manage the solitude of my widowhood. What a poisonous, beautiful lie that turned out to be. The first frost of suspicion had settled in my heart slowly, like the damp chill of a New England autumn. It started with small things, missing bank statements, documents shuffled from their designated folders, David insisting he handle all my bills because it's too much stress for you, Mom. I chalked it up to helpfulness, to the generational gap in financial literacy. But a nagging fear, the primal intuition of a mother who had once known every breath and beat of her son's heart, refused to be silenced. My breaking point arrived not with an argument, but with technology. My home security system, which included a discrete camera feed of the living room and kitchen, had been glitchy for weeks. David had promised to fix it. He never did. So, last Tuesday, while they were both supposedly out, David interviewing for a non-existent corporate job, Veronica visiting her sister, I called a specialist. The technician, a young man named Jeremy, worked quietly for an hour. The main console was deliberately disconnected, Mrs. Eleanor, he whispered, his eyes wide with professional concern. I've rewired it all and the remote audio feed is now pristine. Jeremy left and I waited. I waited until I heard the familiar sound of David's truck pulling into the driveway 45 minutes later. They had never left. I retreated to my bedroom, locked the door, and opened the newly installed mobile application. The silence of my house was immediately shattered by the cold reality pouring through my phone speaker. David was slumped on the sofa, a look of petulant frustration hardening his handsome features. Veronica, always the more calculating of the two, paced the Persian rug, a thick manila envelope clutched in her hand. The original power of attorney documents must be here. David? Veronica hissed, her voice cutting through the silence like splintered glass. Albert needs the official seal and the genuine signature sample. We can't proceed with the forgery without them. Forgery. The word slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I pressed my hand against my mouth, stifling a gasp that felt miles deep. Albert. The name resonated instantly. He wasn't David's financial advisor, as they claimed. He was a notorious, low-tier notary known for dubious estate work, introduced to David at a golf course last month. I've searched everywhere, Veronica. The study, the desk, even under her mattress. David exploded, his face twisting into an ugly mask of greed and impatience. The old woman keeps her life locked down like Fort Knox. She's too cautious for her own good. The old woman. That was me. The woman who had sacrificed her youth to raise him, who had worked 2 shifts to ensure he had the best education, who had given up the chance at rebuilding her own romantic life to focus solely on his well-being. Veronica stopped pacing, her eyes sweeping across the room, unconsciously falling on the very camera I was watching, though she saw only a decorative wall clock. Then we moved to Plan B, darling. The incapacitation route. David looked up, a flicker of something resembling unease crossing his face. But Veronica, Mom is... She's sharp. You saw her ace that crossword puzzle yesterday. She's nowhere near senile. Veronica let out a short, venomous laugh. Darling, being sharp and being perceived as mentally competent are 2 different things when a judge is looking for an easy case. We have 3 years of anecdotal evidence. Her mood swings, her forgetfulness, her increasing distrust. All are little whispers to her friends and Dr. Rodriguez over time. We just need to accelerate the narrative. You mean, use her own defenses against her? David's voice held a sickening mix of excitement and shame. Exactly, Veronica confirmed, placing the envelope on the mahogany table. If she continues to refuse to sign the updated legal documents, the ones that hand us control, we will present her refusal as evidence of paranoia and inability to manage her affairs. We call the doctor, we report a crisis, we get a formal evaluation, and we use her own suspicion of us as the key symptom of her decline. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just about money. It was about my sanity, my dignity, my entire being. They weren't trying to steal my house. They were trying to steal my mind first, rendering me a voiceless ghost trapped in my own failing body. And the house? David asked, his eyes glazed over with avarice. The house, Veronica murmured, stroking the glossy wood of the table, is worth easily over $500,000. Once we have legal control, we sell it, move her to a modest, state-funded assisted living facility in the next county, far away from here, and we use the proceeds to launch David's business. No more living off of Mom's pathetic $700 a month stipend. $700. That was my pension surplus, the money I gave them to cover groceries, a sacrifice I made so David could focus on finding the right opportunity. I leaned back against the headboard of my bed, the phone nearly slipping from my trembling hands. My knees were weak, my head swimming. The silence in my room was overwhelming, the only sound the furious, frantic beat of my heart against my ribs. David, my beautiful, complicated son. He was not merely ungrateful. He was a conspirator of destruction. The primal urge to storm out, to scream, to smash their calculating faces was immense. But the years of nursing had taught me one thing: control. Panic kills. I needed to be cold, precise, and utterly ruthless. They had laid a trap of psychological warfare. Now I would build one of my own. I saved the audio file. Irrefutable evidence. My tears were not for the loss of my innocence, but for the death of the son I thought I knew. I wiped them away, my resolve hardening into a diamond-like resilience. The fight for my home, my money, and my mind had begun, and the enemy was sleeping one room away. The next few hours would be the longest of my life. I had to face them at dinner, pretend nothing had changed, all while knowing their every move, their every calculated lie. The hunter had become the hunted, but what they didn't realize was that the prey was armed and ready to strike back. The dinner that evening was a torture chamber dressed in linen and china. I sat across from my betrayers, forcing down a perfectly cooked salmon fillet that tasted like ash in my mouth. Every word David spoke, every "How was your day, Mom?" and every "You seem a little tired, are you sleeping well?" was laced with the sticky, unbearable sweetness of deceit. I saw the calculation in Veronica's eyes as she watched me, measuring my reaction, looking for any sign of the confusion they were hoping to manufacture. They were in full performance mode. David spoke with agonizing detail about his grueling second interview at a tech firm, describing an imaginary boss named Mr. Harrison and the complex financial models he'd been asked to analyze. Every lie was a layer of insulation for their actual activities that afternoon, searching my private files and plotting my institutionalization. "It sounds like a lot of pressure." "Darling," I said, my voice thin but steady, "a masterpiece of maternal concern. You must be exhausted." "I am, Mom, but I do it for us," he replied, laying a heavy, possessive hand on mine. "I do it so you never have to worry about anything again. I want to take care of you, the way you always took care of me." The hypocrisy was so profound it nearly choked me. This sentiment, once the foundation of our bond, was now the weapon they aimed at my throat. I looked at his hand, the hand I taught to tie a shoelace, the hand that once clung to mine in the dark, and felt an overpowering surge of revulsion. That night, alone in my room, I listened again to the recording. It was necessary clinical proof. I transcribed key quotes, the chilling phrases that needed no interpretation. Incapacitation route, $500,000, pathetic $700, forgery. I printed the transcript on the back of old nursing notes, burying the evidence within the mundane. The next morning, the offensive began. David approached me with a staged solemnity. Mom, about those legal updates. We had a long chat with Mr. Harrison, the lawyer last night. He insists we get them signed today. Why the urgency, David? Are we suddenly rich or suddenly dying? I asked, my tone light, almost dismissive. Veronica stepped in, smooth and sharp as a scalpel. It's about being proactive, Eleanor. You're not getting any younger, and the state laws are changing. We need to ensure that if anything, God forbid, happens to your cognitive ability, we can step in without messy court delays. It's for your own protection. My protection, I echoed, tilting my head. But if I'm signing a new power of attorney, wouldn't it be sensible to have my own lawyer review it? Not David's friend. David's face, which had been carefully sculpted into the image of the dutiful son, fractured for a moment. He quickly replaced it with an expression of wounded innocence. Mom, you don't trust me? After everything? The lawyer Albert is entirely legitimate. I'm doing this out of love. If you bring in an outside attorney, they'll charge you thousands of dollars, just for a review, and drag this out for weeks. Then let it be dragged out, I insisted, standing my ground. I have weeks. I'm retired. I don't mind spending a few $1,000s to ensure my life's work isn't signed away without due diligence. This refusal to be rushed was a victory, but it immediately triggered their next, more insidious step, the one Veronica had called the incapacitation route. Later that afternoon, I heard David on the phone, the sound amplified slightly because the door to their room was deliberately left ajar. He was talking to Dr. Lila Rodriguez, my general practitioner for over 20 years. Doctor, it's David Jones, Eleanor's son, he whispered into the receiver, making sure the pitch was low yet audible. I'm terribly concerned about Mom's mental state. It's escalating. She's developed acute paranoia. She thinks Veronica and I are trying to steal her house and manipulate her legal documents. I gripped the edge of my desk. The audacity was stunning. He was using my correct intuition as evidence of my mental decline. Yes, doctor, I know, David continued, his voice wavering with practiced emotion. It's heartbreaking. She's been hiding things, acting incredibly suspicious. Just yesterday, she flat out accused us of being thieves. She's even talking about having secret cameras in the house again, just like she did a month ago. A month ago? He was referencing the Glitchy camera system, the one he intentionally disabled, as a symptom of my existing delusion. He was building a history of mental instability, brick by careful brick. When did it start? Oh, gradually over the last few months, David sighed dramatically, but the last 72 hours have been the worst. She's constantly checking the locks, whispering to herself, and now she refuses to sign essential legal papers out of this persecutory delusion. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure incandescent rage, not despair. This wasn't mere betrayal. This was an attempt at spiritual murder. They were trying to erase my identity, to turn me into a legal non-entity incapable of defending myself. Yes, Doctor, I understand it's delicate, David concluded, his voice catching in his throat in a spectacular performance. But frankly, Veronica and I are scared. We don't know how far her paranoia can go. We just want her safe, and to ensure she gets the help she needs, even if she fights us. He hung up. They had successfully planted the first seed of doubt about my sanity in the mind of the one person who controlled my medical records. The stage was set for their next move, the forced, urgent doctor's appointment. I knew I couldn't face Dr. Rodriguez with them present. Their version of events would already be cemented in her professional opinion. I had to intercept the narrative. I had to act before I was formally branded as delusional. I had to secure my own defense, and fast. The moment David finished his call to Dr. Rodriguez, their demeanor shifted into an even more sickening phase, weaponized affection. It was a performance so elaborate, so cloyingly sweet that it made my stomach turn. They were rehearsing their roles as the concerned, long-suffering caregivers of a rapidly declining matriarch. David came into the kitchen, where I was making tea and draped an arm around my shoulder, leaning down to give me a gentle, pitying kiss on the crown of my head. You all right, Mom? You look a little pale. Are you having any headaches? I'm fine, dear, I replied, pulling away slightly, my skin crawling at his touch. "Just a little tired. See, Veronica?" David said, turning to his wife with a stage whisper meant for me to hear. "She's exhausted. The stress of living alone is clearly taking its toll." Veronica immediately adopted a sympathetic frown. "Marisol, darling, have you been eating well? You skipped lunch yesterday. The doctor said proper nutrition is vital for the older mind, you know." Every question was a snare. If I admitted to being tired, it was evidence of my decline. If I denied their accusations too vehemently, it was evidence of my increasing distrust and paranoia. I navigated the minefield with meticulous neutrality, giving them no fuel for their narrative. I managed to retreat to the sanctuary of my room. The reality was stark. They were forcing me into a corner. My precious audio recording, which proved their criminal conspiracy, could be instantly dismissed in court. Veronica had mentioned it in their initial plot, illegally obtained recordings made without consent on a private property where they had residency rights. Any mediocre lawyer, she'd boasted, could get them ruled inadmissible in 5 minutes. My evidence was powerful emotionally but potentially useless legally. Their narrative was diabolically brilliant. They were converting my rational defense, the recordings, into the very proof of my supposed illness, the paranoia. That afternoon, Veronica sat beside me while I was watching a documentary about classic cinema, a ritual she usually ignored. "Mom, you know David and I love you," she purred, taking my hand. "We worry. This recent distrust. It's not you. David said he's been talking to Dr. Rodriguez about scheduling an urgent checkup. Just a routine physical, darling. To check your blood pressure. Nothing more. The pressure was suffocating. I needed to see Dr. Rodriguez, but I needed to see her alone before David could poison her completely." The next morning, Friday, David announced the date and time. Monday morning, 9 a.m. "It's just a simple wellness check." "Mom," David said, handing me the paper with the appointment time. "We told the office it's just for your blood pressure, like Veronica said." I looked down at the paper, then back at his face. He was smiling, but his eyes were hard and triumphant. This was the moment of no return. Once I was in that office, under the guise of a routine checkup, they would pull Dr. Rodriguez aside and deliver their final, catastrophic report of my delusional state. "I appreciate the scheduling, David," I said, folding the paper precisely. "But I don't feel comfortable going." "I feel perfectly well." His smile vanished instantly. "Mom, please, don't be difficult. It's for your own good. We need to rule out anything serious." "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. David exchanged a meaningful glance with Veronica. The silence stretched, thick and menacing. "If you refuse, Mom," David finally said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register, "then we'd have to consider other options for your safety and ours. We want to avoid any legal mandates, but if you're refusing basic care out of this paranoia, we'd have no choice but to ensure your best interests are protected by the courts. Legal mandates. An involuntary psychiatric hold. They were threatening to forcibly commit me." The time for caution was over. That same afternoon, while David and Veronica were at the gym, a habit I had observed and timed meticulously, I made my move. I went to the study, closed the door, and dialed Dr. Rodriguez's office number, bypassing the front desk to reach her direct line. "Lila, it's Eleanor Jones," I whispered into the receiver when she finally picked up. A moment of hesitation, then professional concern tinged with caution. "Eleanor, what a coincidence. Your son David was just in touch. Very worried about your mental state." My heart sank, confirming my worst fears. He had moved fast. "Lila, I need to speak to you personally, but not at the appointment David scheduled. I need to see you now, in private, before he can twist this narrative any further. I need you to know the truth." There was a pause on the other end, a moment where 20 years of trust warred with David's recent emotional plea. "Eleanor, are you safe? Is David treating you well? These are very serious times for elder abuse cases, and I need to know if you are under duress." "I am under duress, Lila," I said, the words heavy with desperate honesty. My son and his wife are attempting to steal my home and my life using fraudulent documents. When I discovered them, they decided to make me look mentally incompetent to discredit my accusations. I am not paranoid, Lila. I am alert. And I need you to help me prove it. The battle for my mind was being waged over the phone line. I was laying all my cards on the table, risking my entire medical history on one desperate plea to a trusted friend. The silence on Dr. Rodriguez's end of the line was agonizing, thick with professional doubt and personal concern. I waited, breathing shallowly, knowing that her next words would determine whether I was validated as a victim or dismissed as a delusional old woman. Eleanor, Dr. Rodriguez Lila, finally said, her voice now completely devoid of the cautious neutrality she'd used moments before. It was firm, analytical, and focused. Those are incredibly serious accusations. David presented a compelling case of escalating paranoia and suspicious behavior. Do you have any verifiable recent proof of what you're describing? I hesitated. The illegal recordings, the core of my evidence, were legally compromised. I needed something clean, something that couldn't be dismissed as a symptom of my alleged mental decline. I searched my memory, recalling every detail, every chilling conversation I'd witnessed or overheard. Lila, I said, I have the transcript of their plan, their words. But I also overheard a crucial detail this morning. David called a man named Albert, the lawyer they are using for the forgery, and he explicitly mentioned a $3,000 down payment. He said they needed the payment to finalize the preparation of the fraudulent documents before Monday's appointment. I then recited David's exact words. Words I'd heard just hours ago as they prepared for their gym session. Albert, the old woman is proving more stubborn than expected. Veronica is ready to practice the signature this weekend, but we need those documents clean by Monday morning. The $3,000 is ready. Lila started taking notes immediately. I could hear the scratching of her pen. Can you repeat those details exactly? The $3,000 payment, the forgery practice, the stubbornness comment. I repeated the details slowly, meticulously. Eleanor, Lila concluded, her tone completely shifted. I've known you and your medical history for 20 years. You have a documented history of emotional stability and sharp cognitive function. Your last neurological exam was completely normal. David's narrative of sudden, acute paranoia simply does not align with the reality of your medical profile, especially when countered by these precise, verifiable claims of financial conspiracy. A wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me washed over me. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined anything. My instinct was correct. What do we do now, Lila? David has me scheduled for Monday morning. First, she ordered, we are going to have you come in for an unscheduled comprehensive cognitive assessment right now. This will officially document your current excellent mental faculties, completely disproving their central claim of incapacitation. Second, she continued, I am going to put you in touch with two people, a private investigator specializing in elder financial abuse, and an attorney who focuses on protecting seniors from family fraud. David must not know about any of this. For the purpose of the weekend, you will pretend to have succumbed to the pressure. I drove to her clinic immediately, bypassing the main waiting area through a private entrance. For the next 2 hours, Lila put me through a battery of cognitive tests, short-term and long-term memory, executive function, spatial and temporal orientation, abstract reasoning. It was grueling, a relentless mental marathon, but I poured every ounce of my determination into it. Eleanor, Lila finally said, placing her pen down, a genuine smile replacing her earlier professional intensity. You passed with flying colors. Your mind is the sharpest I've seen in a woman your age. There is zero sign of cognitive decline. I will prepare a comprehensive medical report immediately, officially documenting your full mental capacity to make all legal and financial decisions. It was better than evidence. It was a shield against their primary weapon. I returned home that afternoon, my demeanor calm, almost defeated. David and Veronica were waiting, their faces tense with poorly concealed anxiety. How did it go, Mom? David asked, jumping up from the sofa. What did Dr. Rodriguez say? She said I'm perfectly fine, I replied. maintaining a straight, neutral face. No cognitive problems. She said it was likely just accumulated stress and the anxiety of managing this big house alone. I watched their faces. First, a flicker of relief that I hadn't raised the alarm. Second, a brief, undeniable flash of disappointment that their narrative had failed. Stress? Veronica asked, stepping closer. Why stress, Eleanor? We're here to help. Well, I improvised smoothly. The doctor suggested it might be a good idea to finally organize those papers you wanted me to sign. To reduce the uncertainty, she felt the lack of clarity was a major contributor to my recent nervousness. David and Veronica exchanged a look of barely contained triumph, believing I was finally caving under the pressure of their gaslighting. That's wonderful news. Mom? David beamed, his mask of the dutiful son firmly back in place. So you're ready to sign tomorrow? I think so, I lied again, allowing a hint of hesitancy to color my voice. But the doctor suggested I review them calmly first, just to fully understand. Maybe we can sit down tomorrow afternoon and go over the essential clauses together, one by one. I want to be 100% sure before I sign anything. Absolutely, Veronica quickly agreed, her voice practically dripping with saccharine relief. You take all the time you need, darling. Tomorrow afternoon is perfect, but now I had my own agenda. I had the official medical validation, and I had a meeting scheduled with the private investigator for the next morning. The battle was no longer psychological. It was turning tactical. I had given them their window of victory, and they were walking straight into my meticulously planned counter-trap. The moment of strategic deception had passed. David and Veronica were convinced they had me where they wanted, docile, stressed, and compliant enough to sign away my future on Saturday afternoon. They spent Friday evening celebrating quietly in their room, their muffled laughter and the clinking of glasses a bitter music to my ears. I, however, was in a whirlwind of silent preparation. First thing Saturday morning, before the sun had fully crested the horizon, I was on the phone with Ms. Clara Avery, the elder protection lawyer Dr. Rodriguez had recommended. Ms. Avery was sharp, direct, and refreshingly devoid of sentimentality. Mrs. Eleanor, she stated, the official medical report from Dr. Rodriguez is our greatest asset. It immediately nullifies their narrative of mental incompetence. However, we still need irrefutable evidence of their criminal intent, specifically, their plan to forge or defraud. Your prior recordings may not stand up in court due to the privacy issue. They are pressing me to sign a power of attorney tomorrow afternoon, I informed her. I intend to use that meeting to draw out a complete confession. Excellent, Ms. Avery responded. That is the perfect opportunity. But we need a clean, contemporaneous recording. One that captures them admitting to the forgery or the forced institutionalization on your property. The private investigator will handle the technology, but you must be the actress. Next, I spoke with Detective Thomas Jensen, the private investigator. He was a former police officer, built like a fire hydrant, and possessed a quiet, reassuring competence. Mrs. Eleanor, Detective Jensen explained, I need to come in, early this morning, while they're still sleeping. I'll install a microscopic microphone on your person, and a high-definition camera in a strategic, disguised location in the dining room, the meeting area. We need them to feel completely safe and confident. I felt a slight tremor of fear run through me. Wearing a wire felt like something out of a spy movie, not the quiet life of a retired nurse. But the alternative, a life in an assisted living facility, stripped of my assets and my mind, was far more terrifying. I agree, I confirmed. Come now. They usually sleep late on Saturdays. At 7 o'clock on the dot, Detective Jensen and a quiet young technician named Sam slipped into my house. They worked with silent, efficient professionalism. Sam handed me a small, almost weightless device. This is the microphone, Mrs. Eleanor, he instructed. We'll secure it to the inside seam of your blouse. It's directional and will capture every word at the dining table with broadcast quality. This receiver, he added, pointing to a small box he placed inside the cushion of my favorite reading chair. We'll transmit the feed to my vehicle parked 2 blocks away. We will be recording everything." Detective Jensen then pointed to a miniature camera embedded so perfectly into a decorative floral arrangement on the mantelpiece that even I, standing 3 feet away, couldn't spot it. "This is our video evidence," he said. "The audio is your proof. The video is the confirmation of their body language and coercion. Remember our instruction. Get them to confess explicitly to the fraudulent intent. Make them say the words forge, fake documents, or steal the house. Act cooperative but cautious as you planned. They expect that." As they packed up and left, leaving the silence of the waiting house behind, I felt a strange transformation come over me. The victim Eleanor, the worried mother, had vanished. In her place stood the professional Eleanor, the nurse who had spent decades keeping her emotions in check in crisis situations, the matriarch determined to protect her territory. I had all the pieces, the clean bill of mental health, the legal counsel, and the irrefutable technology. I spent the rest of the morning practicing my role in the mirror. My face had to convey the right blend of surrender and residual hesitation. The moment of truth was just a few hours away. I considered the terrible consequences of what I was about to do, sending my only son, the boy I raised, to prison for 5 to 15 years. The thought twisted my gut, but then I remembered David's voice on the recording. Pathetic $700 and the old woman. I remembered Veronica's cold, triumphant smile. They had already sacrificed me. I was simply defending the integrity of my life and the memory of the son who used to exist. At 1:30 p.m., David and Veronica emerged, looking refreshed and confident. They set up the scene themselves, spreading the complex, intimidating documents across the large dining room table. Veronica even brought over a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas, a touch of fake elegance for the execution. "Ready, Mom?" David asked, his voice dripping with the fake warmth I now despised. He held out a fountain pen, its silver surface gleaming under the dining room chandelier. "As I'll ever be, David," I replied, forcing a soft, hesitant smile. I walked to the table, and as I sat down, I subtly adjusted the sleeve of my blouse, ensuring the wire was perfectly positioned to capture every word of their final, damning confession. The trap was sprung. The final act was about to begin. The air at the dining table was thick with suppressed anticipation. For David and Veronica, this was their victory lap. For me, it was the final high-stakes scene of an elaborate stage play. David had arranged the documents like a lawyer, each page marked with a sticky tab indicating a signature line. Veronica sat beside him, pen in hand, ready to guide my unsteady elderly hand. "All right, Mom," David began, his voice perfectly modulated to sound patient and condescending. "We're just going to go over the key points, as Dr. Rodriguez suggested, to clear up any lingering stress or confusion." He started with the first document, the general durable power of attorney. It was densely worded, riddled with legal jargon designed to confuse anyone not trained in law. "This document," David explained, pointing to a dense paragraph, "simply ensures that if you are ever incapacitated, say, by a stroke or prolonged illness, Veronica and I can manage your medical and financial decisions seamlessly." "And what exactly does incapacitated mean, David?" I asked, looking up from the document with a perfect show of naive concern. Veronica jumped in quickly, her voice smooth. "It means any situation where you can't express your wishes, Eleanor. A hospital stay, for instance, or if your memory starts to fail, as older people sometimes experience, or if you two decide my memory is failing," I countered, my eyes widening slightly, maintaining the persona of the suspicious but easily intimidated elderly woman. David's forehead immediately furrowed. He glanced at Veronica, the first crack in their performance. "Why would you say that, Mom? We've only ever been worried about you. We had that conversation last week because you were showing symptoms of real confusion." "Real symptoms," I repeated softly, my gaze fixed on the dense text. "Or convenient symptoms. It's very convenient, isn't it? The minute I asked to have these documents reviewed by my own counsel, I suddenly develop memory problems that justify you taking full control of my life. The silence was instant and heavy. I had gone off script from the cautious but compliant role, pushing directly into the heart of their psychological attack. I watched David and Veronica exchange a tense, warning look. The wire on my chest was recording every second of their discomfort. "I don't appreciate that implication, Eleanor," Veronica finally said, her voice tightening with strain. "We are trying to protect you. This document simply ensures your welfare." "Protection doesn't typically include the ability to sell a house," I stated, tapping the page with my finger, tracing the line that mentioned the disposition of real estate. "It says here that you can dispose of real property as you see fit for the welfare of the grantor. My welfare could easily be defined as freeing up $500,000 for David and Veronica's future. Couldn't it?" David sighed dramatically, attempting to reassert the victimized caregiver role. "Mom, that clause is standard. It's for emergencies. If you needed incredibly expensive medical care, for example, or if we agreed it was time for you to move into a facility where you could get specialized care." "Ah," I murmured. "A specialized care facility. The kind of facility that could be financed with the $500,000 from the sale of my house." I kept my voice flat, letting the chilling implication hang in the air. David's face was pale. Veronica, however, was quickly calculating her escape. She tried to pivot back to the original script. "Eleanor, you're fixating on one minor clause. This is a complex document." "I'm fixating on the clause that lets you turn me into a ward of the state and liquidate my sole asset," I interrupted, never raising my voice, forcing the tension higher. "Just as I fixated on the names I heard in your conversation with Albert." The mention of the name Albert acted like a physical shockwave. David slammed his hands on the table, instantly abandoning the pretense of patience. "Where did you hear that name, Mom? You don't know anyone named Albert." I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto his, the deep wells of my maternal disappointment finally overflowing into a look of absolute, cold knowing. "I heard that name yesterday morning, David. On your phone call. The one where you told him the old lady was proving more stubborn than expected, and that if necessary, Veronica was ready to forge my signature." The mask fell completely. David stared at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying blend of panic and fury. Veronica recoiled in her chair, a hand flying to her mouth. I could almost hear Detective Jensen's satisfied sigh from 2 blocks away. I had them. The confession was on the wire. "You've been spying on us," David stammered, the realization hitting him with crushing force. "I've been protecting myself," I corrected, closing the folder of fraudulent documents. "From my own son, who decided that stripping his mother bare was easier than finding an honest job. Now you can stop the theater. Tell me the truth. Is Albert a real lawyer, or is he a specialist in fraudulent documentation?" Veronica finally found her voice, sharp and defiant, even though she knew she was caught. "It doesn't matter what you think you heard, Eleanor. You have no proof of anything. You have illegally obtained recordings. We will simply deny everything. Are you sure about that, Veronica?" I asked, my voice now completely calm, the calmness of a surgeon preparing for the final necessary incision. "Completely sure you made sure I had no proof?" The table was set for the ultimate betrayal, their own words used to seal their fate. The truth was about to surface, and it would be recorded for posterity. Veronica, though visibly shaken, was too arrogant to back down. She had committed to the lie, and in her mind, my illegally obtained recordings were a dead end. She stood up, maintaining a posture of icy defiance. "Absolutely sure, Eleanor," she spat, her voice laced with contempt. "We made certain you had nothing. Your cameras were disabled weeks ago. Any recordings you think you made previously would be inadmissible. And we have already prepared statements confirming your paranoia and inability to remember events correctly." David, seizing upon her certainty, regained a fraction of his composure. He walked around the table, a venomous sneer replacing the panic. "Exactly, Mom. We figured you'd pull this stunt. We even prepared a complete set of fake alibis for Tuesday morning, showing I was in job interviews the entire time. The WhatsApp messages with Mr. Harrison? Completely fabricated. It is incredibly easy to fake those things when you know how. The sheer arrogance of their admission, spoken so confidently into the active microphone, was breathtaking. They were confessing their extensive web of deceit, the fake job search, the manufactured evidence, believing they were simply mocking the defeated old woman. So, you admit it was all a setup, I stated, my eyes steady, focusing on the microphone hidden beneath my blouse. A setup to make me believe I was crazy and unable to manage my own affairs. Veronica laughed, a short, cruel sound. We admit you're a stupid old woman who almost ruined a perfectly executed plan, Eleanor. But it doesn't matter now, because either you sign those documents or we proceed to Plan B. Plan B, I repeated, giving her the cue she desperately wanted to deliver. David's smile was pure malice, devoid of any shred of filial love. Plan B is simple. A fake medical certificate declaring you are not in the right mental state. We have contacts who can arrange that for the right price. Much less than the $3,000. $3,000 we are paying Albert. And then Veronica walked up to me, standing barely 6 inches from my face, her breath smelling of expensive coffee and deceit. And then, Eleanor, we put you in the cheapest facility we can find, a place where you won't be bothering anyone. And we sell this house to finance our future. Our future without you, she added, her voice dropping to a triumphant whisper. David delivered the final, crushing blow. Because frankly, Mom, you've already served your purpose in our lives. There it was. The complete, clear, irrefutable confession of their entire criminal plan, including the attempted forgery, the medical fraud, the psychological manipulation, and the cold-blooded institutionalization plot. It was everything the lawyer and the detective had asked for, and more. I see, I said simply, allowing the silence to stretch, letting the weight of their words settle. And you feel absolutely no remorse for betraying the woman who cared for and loved you? David scoffed bitterly. Remorse? For a woman who made us live like parasites on her crumbs? This house is worth a fortune, and we've been waiting for your monthly handouts of $700. $700, like beggars. We could be living like millionaires. With my money? I asked, rising slowly from my chair. With the money that's rightfully ours, David corrected, his voice rising in petulant self-justification. I'm your only son. This house should be mine by right. By right of having endured 35 years of your emotional manipulation, your maternal blackmail, and your constant need for control. I walked slowly towards the window, looking out at the yard where I had taught him to ride his first bicycle, where we had planted a small maple tree on his 10th birthday. I gave them one last chance to realize the monstrousness of their actions. So all of this is my fault? Completely your fault, Veronica confirmed, her voice ringing with self-righteous indignation. If you had been a less selfish mother, if you had given us access to your money voluntarily, none of this would have been necessary. I stayed silent for a long moment, allowing the depth of their depravity to sink in. I finally understood who they truly were. I turned to face them, the expression on my face a terrifying calm. Well, I said, picking up the fountain pen they had offered me earlier. David's eyes lit up with renewed triumph. Now that you understand, David said, gesturing to the documents, you can sign them and make all of this easier for everyone. I held the pen over the signature line, the final dramatic pause before the fall. You know what, David? I told him, a small, genuine smile curving my lips, a smile he didn't know how to interpret. What? You're right about one thing, I said, and I let the pen drop dramatically onto the mahogany table. I am an old woman, but I'm not so stupid as to sign my own death sentence. The look of utter confusion on their faces lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the front door burst open. The front door slammed against the wall, echoing the violence of the discovery. Standing in the foyer were not imaginary figures, but Detective Thomas Jensen, looking massive and resolute, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and my attorney, Ms. Clara Avery. The shock on David and Veronica's faces was absolute. A magnificent sight of fear and comprehension hitting simultaneously. David froze, mid-sentence, his handsome features slack with disbelief. Veronica took a small, involuntary step backward toward the kitchen, as if she could somehow dissolve into the tiled floor. "Good afternoon," Detective Jensen announced. His voice professional, calm, and utterly final. "I am Detective Jensen. David Jones and Veronica Williams, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, and elder financial abuse." "This is impossible," David finally stammered, his eyes darting frantically between the police and me, his mother. "You have no proof of anything. She's hysterical. She's been making up conspiracies." I watched, detached, as one of the police officers walked swiftly toward David. I reached up slowly, deliberately, and unclipped the tiny microphone from the collar of my blouse. I placed the minuscule device on the table right next to the fraudulent power of attorney documents. "Actually, David," I said, my voice steady, clear, and perfectly captured by the other hidden devices, "I have high-quality recordings of the entire conversation we just had. Recordings where you explicitly confess to your plan to forge my signature, steal my house, institutionalize me against my will, and obtain fake medical certificates to have me declared mentally incompetent." The police officer secured David's hands behind his back. The cold click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years, a sound that symbolized the breaking of the chain of my own abuse. Ms. Avery, the lawyer, stepped forward, her presence radiating competence. She began to gather the documents spread across the table, sliding them into an evidence bag. "In addition to the audio recordings, Mr. Jones and Ms. Williams," Ms. Avery explained, her voice precise and legal, "we have high-definition video of this entire conversation, thanks to the cameras we installed this morning while you were asleep. We also have a complete official medical report from Dr. Lila Rodriguez that categorically states, Mrs. Eleanor Jones is in perfect mental faculties and is completely capable of making all legal and financial decisions." Veronica finally found her voice, though it was a desperate, broken shriek. "This is an illegal trap. You recorded us without our consent. We'll sue for entrapment." Detective Jensen addressed her with professional patience. "False, Ms. Williams. Mrs. Jones has the absolute legal right to record conversations within her own home, on her own property, when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Furthermore, you voluntarily confessed all the details of your criminal conspiracy without any coercion. You thought you were mocking her. You were merely providing irrefutable evidence." As the second officer moved to handcuff Veronica, David finally reacted, not with remorse, but with blind, animalistic fury. "This is all your fault, old woman," he bellowed, struggling against the handcuffs. "If you hadn't been a constant manipulative presence in my life, if you had just treated us like a real family instead of constantly controlling us, none of this would have been necessary." His words were a last-ditch attempt to shift the blame, to justify his monstrous actions through a warped lens of victimhood. But I had prepared for this moment for 72 hours. I needed him and myself to hear the final, definitive truth. "David," I said, walking towards him, my calm a direct contrast to his rage. "For 35 years, I worked double shifts as a nurse to give you everything you needed. I gave up rebuilding my romantic life to focus entirely on your education. I paid for your college tuition in full. I supported you financially every time you lost a job. I opened the doors of this house to you when you had nowhere else to live." The police officer finished reading David his rights, but I continued to speak, the words spilling out. A catharsis long overdue. All I ever asked for in return was respect, honesty, and something resembling the filial love any mother deserves. Instead, you chose to see me as an obstacle to your financial prosperity, as an inconvenient, foolish woman you could manipulate, Rob, and discard when I was no longer useful to you. As the second officer finally secured the cuffs on a screaming Veronica, she managed one last desperate yell. "We took care of you. We kept you company. We helped you with everything." "You took care of me," I retorted, the low volume of my voice more devastating than any shout. Like vultures care for a dying animal, waiting patiently for the moment to devour the remains. The only difference, Veronica, is that you decided to speed up the process through fraud and psychological manipulation. The finality of the moment hung in the air. Detective Jensen placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder as the officers escorted David and Veronica, now subdued but glaring with raw hatred, toward the front door. The chapter of betrayal was closing. The front door closed with a quiet click, sealing David and Veronica outside in the presence of the law. The sudden absence of their venomous energy left a profound, almost paralyzing silence in the dining room. I stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of the planned signing, the fraudulent documents, the empty evidence bags, and the small, unassuming microphone I had retrieved from the table. The silence was not empty, however. It was charged with the weight of justice delivered. Ms. Avery, my attorney, immediately shifted from the dramatic to the pragmatic. She guided me to my favorite armchair, moving with the efficient care of someone who understood that the adrenaline rush was now giving way to exhaustion. "Mrs. Eleanor," Ms. Avery said, sitting opposite me, "let's discuss the next steps. With the evidence we've collected, the audio confession, the video confirmation, and Dr. Rodriguez's certified mental health report, the prosecutor is prepared to file charges for criminal conspiracy, attempted fraud, document forgery, elder financial abuse, and psychological manipulation with the intent to mentally incapacitate a victim." She spoke in measured, grave tones. "We are talking about sentences that, cumulatively, could range from 5 to 15 years. 5 to 15 years in prison for each of them. 15 years in prison. For David, my only son. Despite everything, the magnitude of that number created a physical ache in my chest. The residual stubborn flicker of maternal love, the very thing they had exploited, flared up one last time. And if I wanted to offer them some kind of deal?" I asked, the question barely a whisper. "Could we arrange something where they simply disappear from my life in exchange for not pressing for the maximum sentence?" Ms. Avery anticipated the question. "I knew you might ask that, Eleanor. We have already prepared a preliminary settlement agreement, often used in cases of extreme family abuse where the victim seeks protection over punishment. We could offer a deal where they, 1. Immediately renounce any and all future claims on your property, assets, or inheritance. 2. Agree to a minimum restraining distance of 500 feet, 500 feet from you permanently. And 3. Complete a mandatory rehabilitation program focused on family and elder abuse. In exchange," Ms. Avery continued, "you could agree not to insist on the maximum criminal sentence. They would still face serious charges, perhaps 2 or 3 years, 3 years, and a substantial period of probation. But it prevents the harshest outcome. The choice was agonizing. Absolute justice versus personal peace with a measure of mercy." David, standing at the front door just minutes ago, had looked at me with eyes that mixed cold hatred with desperate pleading, asking if I was truly going to destroy my own family for a house. Now, sitting in the quiet aftermath, I finally had a clear, definitive answer. David destroyed this family the moment he decided my life was worth only the dollars he could get for my house, I stated, the words firm and without hesitation. I am simply protecting what is left of my dignity and my right to live in peace for the years I have remaining. We proceed with the charges, I confirmed, but offer the settlement agreement. I want them out of my life, legally and permanently, before the trial begins. I need this chapter closed. Ms. Avery nodded, respectful of my decision. Understood. The prosecutor will accept the evidence immediately. Detective Jensen will be here shortly to complete the final report. You did a remarkable job, Eleanor. You were brave, calculated, and saved yourself from a profound injustice. The lawyer's words of praise felt distant. I had faced down 2 predators, but the victory felt heavy, stained by the blood of familial trust. As the sun began to set, painting the living room in long, melancholy shadows, I found myself walking slowly through the house. I stopped in the kitchen, recalling the hundreds of meals I had cooked for David, the countless hours I had spent planning his future. I walked into his old bedroom, now their room, and saw the neat, impersonal decor. It was the room of two strangers, not family. For the first time in months, I was truly alone in my house. The profound silence was no longer terrifying, but a blanket of restored peace, a quiet acknowledgement that the danger was gone. The betrayal had been exposed, and the integrity of my home had been reclaimed. The process of healing, though daunting, was about to begin. The house was mine again. My life was mine again. My recovery wasn't linear. It was a complex process filled with unexpected emotional triggers. Every time the phone rang, I held my breath, half expecting David to call, to beg, to rationalize, or perhaps, for a moment of impossible grace, to apologize. He never did. The silence from him was the final, definitive confirmation of the depth of his emptiness. The restraining order, the distance of 500 feet, was not just a legal measure. It was a psychological boundary I desperately needed. I felt safe again, but the safety was hard-won, built on the ruin of my previous assumptions about family. To fully reclaim my life, I knew I had to go beyond simple redecoration. I decided to make my house not just a home, but a sanctuary, a place that actively rejected the energy of their betrayal. I started in the dining room, the site of the confrontation. I replaced the dark mahogany table with a bright, reclaimed oak piece and painted the walls a cheerful, vibrant blue. It was a conscious rejection of the darkness that had once permeated that space. I also began to speak openly about my experience, not with bitterness, but with a clear educational purpose. My former colleagues and friends were shocked, and many revealed their own quiet concerns about David and Veronica's controlling behavior over the past 3 years. My honesty helped validate their own instincts. I also volunteered with a local nonprofit organization that specialized in elder financial protection. This work became my new passion, a way to channel my past pain into active purpose. I used my story, without revealing all the harsh details, to educate other seniors about the warning signs, the pressure to sign documents quickly, the insistence on controlling finances, the gaslighting attempts to question their mental acuity. During one training session, I used the exact language David and Veronica had used against me. I showed the audience how often perpetrators use love and concern as a shield. When they start questioning your memory, I advised, looking directly into the eyes of a woman who looked exactly like my 68-year-old self, that is the moment to get a professional cognitive assessment. It is your most powerful weapon against their narrative. The irony was not lost on me. The tools they had intended to use for my destruction, the urgent doctor's visit, the focus on my mental health, were the very tools that secured my freedom. One afternoon, Ms. Avery called me with news about David and Veronica. They were struggling to comply with the mandated rehabilitation program. David had tried to appeal the restraining order, claiming emotional distress, but the judge, having reviewed the full video evidence, had dismissed the motion immediately and levied a substantial fine. They were truly on their own now, stripped of the financial foundation they had expected to inherit. The news was a cold comfort. It was not pleasure I felt, but the sober realization that consequences are inevitable. I decided to take a trip. For 3 decades, my entire life had been contained within the boundaries of my nursing job and David's needs. Now I bought a plane ticket to the Mediterranean, a place I had always dreamed of visiting but never allowed myself the luxury. Packing my suitcase, I realized I was a completely different woman. The timid, overly trusting mother was gone. In her place was Eleanor, the survivor, the fighter, the matriarch who had reclaimed her kingdom. I packed my new travel wallet, my passport, and a small, cherished photo of David as a 10-year-old boy, smiling after winning his Little League game. I carried the memory of the good son, knowing the other David was simply a cautionary tale. My life was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had fiercely protected. I had protected my home, my independence, and the profound, enduring truth that my life still mattered. The final piece of the puzzle was accepting the grief, not as a weakness, but as the unavoidable cost of a devastatingly necessary victory. The emotional distance was finally complete. My recovery wasn't linear. It was a complex process filled with unexpected emotional triggers. Every time the phone rang, I held my breath, half expecting David to call, to beg, to rationalize, or perhaps for a moment of impossible grace, to apologize. He never did. The silence from him was the final, definitive confirmation of the depth of his emptiness. The restraining order, the distance of 500 feet, was not just a legal measure. It was a psychological boundary I desperately needed. I felt safe again, but the safety was hard-won, built on the ruin of my previous assumptions about family. To fully reclaim my life, I knew I had to go beyond simple redecoration. I decided to make my house not just a home, but a sanctuary, a place that actively rejected the energy of their betrayal. I started in the dining room, the site of the confrontation. I replaced the dark mahogany table with a bright, reclaimed oak piece and painted the walls a cheerful, vibrant blue. It was a conscious rejection of the darkness that had once permeated that space. I also began to speak openly about my experience, not with bitterness, but with a clear educational purpose. My former colleagues and friends were shocked, and many revealed their own quiet concerns about David and Veronica's controlling behavior over the past 3 years. My honesty helped validate their own instincts. I also volunteered with a local nonprofit organization that specialized in elder financial protection. This work became my new passion, a way to channel my past pain into active purpose. I used my story, without revealing all the harsh details, to educate other seniors about the warning signs, the pressure to sign documents quickly, the insistence on controlling finances, the gaslighting attempts to question their mental acuity. During one training session, I used the exact language David and Veronica had used against me. I showed the audience how often perpetrators use love and concern as a shield. When they start questioning your memory, I advised, looking directly into the eyes of a woman who looked exactly like my 68-year-old self, that is the moment to get a professional cognitive assessment. It is your most powerful weapon against their narrative. The irony was not lost on me. The tools they had intended to use for my destruction, the urgent doctor's visit, the focus on my mental health, were the very tools that secured my freedom. One afternoon, Ms. Avery called me with news about David and Veronica. They were struggling to comply with the mandated rehabilitation program. David had tried to appeal the restraining order, claiming emotional distress, but the judge, having reviewed the full video evidence, had dismissed the motion immediately and levied a substantial fine. They were truly on their own now, stripped of the financial foundation they had expected to inherit. The news was a cold comfort. It was not pleasure I felt, but the sober realization that consequences are inevitable. I decided to take a trip. For 3 decades, my entire life had been contained within the boundaries of my nursing job and David's needs. Now I bought a plane ticket to the Mediterranean, a place I had always dreamed of visiting but never allowed myself the luxury. Packing my suitcase, I realized I was a completely different woman. The timid, overly trusting mother was gone. In her place was Eleanor, the survivor, the fighter, the matriarch who had reclaimed her kingdom. I packed my new travel wallet, my passport, and a small, cherished photo of David as a 10-year-old boy, smiling after winning his Little League game. I carried the memory of the good son, knowing the other David was simply a cautionary tale. My life was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had fiercely protected. I had protected my home, my independence, and the profound, enduring truth that my life still mattered. The final piece of the puzzle was accepting the grief, not as a weakness, but as the unavoidable cost of a devastatingly necessary victory. The emotional distance was finally complete. I spent 2 glorious weeks on the Mediterranean coast. For the first time in my life, I made decisions solely for my own pleasure: where to eat, what history to learn, and how long to sleep. The constant background anxiety that had hummed beneath the surface of my life for 3 years, the need to watch, to anticipate, to appease, was gone. I was simply Eleanor, an independent woman with a hard-earned wisdom. I spent 2 glorious weeks on the Mediterranean coast. For the first time in my life, I made decisions solely for my own pleasure. Where to eat, what history to learn, and how long to sleep. The constant background anxiety that had hummed beneath the surface of my life for 3 years, the need to watch, to anticipate, to appease, was gone. I was simply Eleanor, an independent woman with a hard-earned wisdom. When I returned home, the house felt truly mine. The new oak table gleamed in the sunlight. The garden bloomed under the care of the college student. The emptiness of the house was no longer the silence of betrayal, but the peace of sovereignty. The last remnant of the legal battle was the probation hearing. Though I was not required to attend, I chose to. I needed to see the conclusion of this chapter, not on a piece of paper, but in the flesh. David and Veronica looked tired, drawn, and utterly defeated. They were sentenced to 18 months of probation, mandatory community service, and ordered to continue the intensive family counseling. They stood before the judge, their former arrogance replaced by sullen resentment. When the judge asked if I had a final statement to read, I approached the podium, my heart calm and steady. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and strong. "I am here not as a prosecutor, but as a survivor. I have lost the son I raised, but I have gained my life back. I want my experience to be a lesson that teaches every older American that they are not disposable, that their life savings and their dignity are not privileges to be earned, but rights to be defended." I looked at David and Veronica, who avoided my gaze. They asked me if I was going to destroy my family over a house. I stand here today to say that I didn't destroy this family. Their greed did. And my choice to defend myself was the most profound act of self-love and self-respect I have ever performed. I concluded by acknowledging the support I received. From Dr. Rodriguez, Ms. Avery, and Detective Jensen, I left the courthouse feeling not vindictive, but whole. The greatest realization I had in the following months was this: the true loss was theirs, not mine. They lost their dignity, their freedom, and the unconditional love of a mother who would have eventually given them everything. I lost an illusion, and in exchange, I gained an unbreakable spirit. I learned that kindness without boundaries is a form of weakness, and that love, when confronted with malice, must be armed with justice. My life today is vibrant. I travel, I volunteer, I speak. And I cherish the peace in my beautiful, reclaimed house, the house that now represents my resilience, not my martyrdom. This is not a story about bitterness. It is a profound lesson about self-preservation. Never let the fear of being perceived as difficult stop you from demanding respect, especially from those closest to you. If your gut screams betrayal, trust it. Get an attorney, get a doctor's report, and get evidence. Your life, your assets, and your dignity are worth fighting for, no matter your age. The cost of standing up is steep, but the cost of kneeling is your soul. Subscribe now to hear more true stories of triumph over treachery and learn how to claim your own powerful victory.